a model from the Omega Sisters collab that was actually designed by the sisters themselves and also benefited from the tune-up treatment. It is OMG00 Omega Tail, regraded, with a kit of scope, double beam, float legs, and the leg ability of carrier, which grants a chance to pass any applied negative ailment inflicted from self to the attacker. Now, as a model that was part of the original collaboration that when it first dropped and then later came back with the rerun, Omega Tail, as mentioned, is more of a novelty than what a lot of people would realize, and those who would look deeper would actually find this model was designed by the sisters themselves for a contest ages ago, but when they had the collaboration, had the opportunity to bring this model to life. Scope is a support skill that is a rather rare one at that, and while not super useful in current meta, in early game it actually is pretty solid. But what it does is that it applies pierce damage to one particular part to an ally, and it also buffs their success by 50% for that one turn. So any skills that don't have pierce damage or have not unlocked it yet, such as free 5-star power rifle, or even in Omega Tail's case, beam attacks, he's able to unlock pierce damage and a boosted likelihood of hitting and critting for that one hit. But because it only applies for one blow, he will need to apply it multiple times in order to deal it multiple times. Beam on left and right arm are optical attribute skills that grant a ×2 damage bonus at 30% charge and a ×3 bonus at 100% charge. Though what stands this part out from compared to laser or hyper beam is that even though it has the higher damage output, it also lacks the pierce damage. Plus, with it also being Metaforce reliant, means the first couple strikes really aren't going to be as powerful unless you can get a charge behind them first before actually firing. Plus, they are actually one of the few parts that would greatly benefit from Scope, which he ironically also has equipped on his head. So at that point, you honestly could kind of spin him around and make him a Hyper Beam with extra steps to a point. But in terms of competitive meta, you would kind of shoot yourself in the foot by doing so. Float legs means that he will have pretty solid coverage across all terrains at A rank across the board, minus of course S rank on Cyber, which everyone has. And in the armor department, he's actually kind of in that mid-range, but also not too shabby either with armor, with head HP of about 3,400, arms about 3,200 each, and his legs also at 3,200. Moderately healthy HP pool there, so nothing overly drastic, but not quite paper armor either. His leg stats aren't too shabby, but also kind of depends on how you choose to use him. A mobility of 779 and the ability to support up to 2 heavy parts actually means this is a pretty solid leg right from start, which is honestly something hard to find these days if you exclude boss types. An evade of 938 isn't too shabby, he'll have a pretty decent time dodging or grazing incoming attacks. A melee resist of 595 is probably one of the biggest pain points on him though, as this does mean he will take a very considerable amount of increased damage from melee fighters that get up close and personal. But a shoot resist of 1029 does kind of round this back out to a bit, not by much, but kind of more of a minimum expected point. Plus, given that he's also float-legged, means he actually does kind of round this back around just a little bit and kind of relies on those terrain bonuses to kind of round himself up. The carrier leg ability actually is kind of unique as it doesn't really serve any utility to his kit natively, but if the opposing side does decide to make use of ailments on their team, such as Bug, or Freeze, Wave, Hold, Deathlock, Melt, or so on, then he can really start having fun, as the more ailments he has applied, the more likely it is that upon being attacked, he has a chance to carry it from himself to the enemy that attacked him. So if he's frozen or shocked in place, there's a good chance he actually could pass it off and punish the enemy for touching him while ailed. Now when it comes to his tune-up treatments, Omega Tail doesn't really do a whole lot in terms of what he brings to the table, mostly just some charge reduction requirements or even some passive bonuses upon activating skills. His head has access to plus 100 to heat and cool, and his passive of Scope has the opportunity to add an additional 20% to power upon activating Scope. Now normally, Scope is only good for that free use of pierce damage and the 50% success bonus, but having an extra kick behind it with 20% to power means that even if he is guaranteed to land the hit with a higher likelihood, he will also hit just a little bit harder than before, making each use of Scope just a little bit more worth its use. Naturally, that goes without saying, you definitely want to push for that as the main go-to bonus, and given that this is a skill you have to activate, I would recommend putting those remaining points into heat so he has a chance to activate it faster. His right arm has access to plus 100 to power, plus 100 to heat and cool, and damage plus gets a 20% charge reduction requirement in order to access the damage bonuses that Beam has offered to it. Naturally, with Beam, you really don't want to focus on damage too heavily since it is kind of built for spot nuking more than anything else, but Omega Tail kind of turns this around and spins it in his favor to where he can actually make it work by repeating uses of Scope and Beam and pretty much rinse and repeat until he runs out of head uses. That being said, the charge reduction requirement will certainly be helpful to help him access his damage bonuses faster without having to actually spend turns charging Metaforce, or as many turns charging Metaforce, to activate them. Behind that, power is nice to have, but you could honestly go heat, cool, or power and not really go wrong either way, as you could get there progressively faster or hit just a little bit harder based on personal preference. His left arm has access to plus 200 to power, plus 100 to heat or cool, and also has the same charge reduction requirement that his right arm does. Again, it goes without saying that the charge requirement is absolutely a must-have if you're going to make use or capitalize on Omega Tail at all. And even though his right arm has pretty equal bonuses, the left arm is honestly very obvious which bonus it wants to shoot for the most with that plus 200 to power with your remaining points. His legs have access to plus 500 to melee resist, plus 200 to evade, plus 100 to mobility, and his passive of Carrier has access to plus 50 to power or success when carrying an ailment. Now, to be completely honest, Omega Tail's legs were kind of decent at first glance, but a lot of these bonuses actually round them out and make him a lot better overall than what he could on the field. And that higher damage melee resist that he has access to is very easily the big go-to bonus you want to capitalize on, because already having it barely 600 is not great. But if you could round it out with almost to over 1,000, that can honestly make his legs much better suited for all-round general purpose. Evade, mobility, and the passive honestly all have very good bonuses, and you really can't go wrong picking any of them. You could go evade and make him more dodgy, you could go for mobility and put him at almost 900, or you could go for the boost to Carrier and kind of give yourself an extra bonus when passing along ailments, and you really can't go wrong with any of your remaining points in doing so. Now, comparing his original pure set and mixed parts scores I originally had him at about a 6 across the board, both for his pure and his mixed parts scores, given the fact that even though he was Metaforce reliant and he lacked pierce damage, the scope ability on his head actually kind of made it work to a point and made a good chunk of his hard comings and pain points kind of forgivable as long as you knew how to use them. Factoring in his new tune-ups and bumping his pure set and mixed parts scores, I do have to maintain his pure set score at a pretty solid 6 out of 10 and his mixed parts at a 7 out of 10. Given even though Scope and Beam you probably may not use super often on your more competitive teams, the legs actually have a lot of very good benefits that you could make use of, and even though Carrier isn't something you may not see or use super often, it is honestly a very nice extra bonus to capitalize on and make use of to possibly turn the tides in your favor if your enemy likes using ailments.